Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We still have 4 more minutes to go, and I hope that more participants will join soon. May I suggest that all of you to please turn on your camera to say hello before we start the webinar this afternoon? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Before we go, may I invite some of you to please share your professional development activities during the summer and how you prepare for the new school year, which starts very soon. I want to hear some voice from many parts of the country. Somebody from the south. May I invite Ms. Dung Le from An Giang province? Could you please share your professional development activities during the summer and how are you preparing or your school is preparing for the new school year?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me to share some of my development preparation for this summer. Last week, I have already shared some of the things that I have learned from this webinar to my colleagues, and they feel very happy, and that's the things that they want to apply for their next school years is some of the things on Nearpod. Yeah, Nearpod is the one that they told me that they will choose to apply for the next school year. Yes. And it is also the products that I really like very much. Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dung Le from An Giang province, a province in the southern part of the country. Once again, may I invite all of you to please turn on the camera to say hello before we start. It's good to see your faces when we talk together. Now we travel from the south to the north. May I invite a teacher, maybe from the central part of the country, from the Central Highlands. May I invite Mr. Nguyễn Nhật from Gia Lai province? Are you there, Mr. Nhật? Nhật, I'm sorry. Mr. Nhật is not available. So one teacher from the north, may I invite Ms. Phượng from Phú Thọ province near Hanoi capital? Yes.
Okay. Nice to meet you again. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Okay. I'm very pleased to say that I have been teaching online for some of my students in Phú Thọ province, in Địa Chi, in Hanoi too. Okay, and whenever I attended to the webinar, I also share my experience and some news I learned from you from the webinar. Thanks, Ms. Christina. And some of you are sharing to help me improve my teaching professions. I think that, and this week we have a plan for the new school year. Our English group have some meeting and we discussed on the plan, teaching plan. And we prepare for some projects. To help students in the new school year. That's something we prepare and share you today. Thank you very much. And I hope that I can apply some of the tune, some technique, some of the experience that helped me and my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Phượng from Phú Thọ province. I see on the screen Miss Thủy Tiên Trần from maybe from Nguyễn Đình Chiểu school in Mỹ Tho. In Mỹ Tho city, Tiền Giang district, right? I say this because last week I had a chance to work with a group of teachers from Nguyễn Đình Chiểu school to talk about creating environments for school students to use English, and the group of students, teachers in Tiền Giang intended to organize a video making contest in which they can apply a lot of digital tools in making the videos. Ms. Thủy Tiên, could you share some information about that, or just your feeling about this webinar? Please turn on your micro, Thủy Tiên. Ms. Thủy Tiên, yes.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Hello, Mr. Lin. Nice to see you. I am the very familiar face to you on the staff from SEAMEO RETRAC.
Yes.
Because I joined a lot of conferences hosted by SEAMEO RETRAC and a lot of courses, especially this course instructed by Miss Christina Cavish. Thanks to all the information I've got from here and previous courses, I share to my fellow teachers, and they are always up to date to every new techniques or new ways of teaching from online to offline. They can employ a lot of techniques to their studies.
Yes.
And in this opportunity, I would like to send a very big thanks from me and my fellow teacher to SEAMEO RETRAC to organize a lot of courses and a very valuable conference for teachers from very far provinces.
Yes. Thank you, Ms. Thủy Tiên, for your sharing.
Yes.
I just want to share with you right now, I'm working with a team of experts in Vietnam too, and Dr. Bessie Barish in the United States to prepare an online course for community of practice for teachers in Vietnam. And we believe to promote this online program next year by the National Foreign Languages Projects. And you see on the screen, teachers are all around Vietnam, from Ho Chi Minh City. Many teachers in Ho Chi Minh City, some in the northern provinces like Lai Châu or Tuyên Quang, Bắc Cạn, very far away from Ho Chi Minh City to the cities in the south. This is a great opportunity to know all of you from all parts of the country. And one more information to share. Right now, in the International Hall of SEAMEO RETRAC, we are working with another specialist from the United States, Dr. Ivan Eubanks from University of Cayman Islands. He's delivering the workshop on academic writing, understanding research and academic writing for lecturers from many universities in the South. So SEAMEO RETRAC is very proud to provide a lot of opportunities of professional development for teachers, English teachers in Vietnam. And one more thing to share, in November, the 17th to 18th, we are going to organize the annual international conference on TESOL. And I hope that many of you will, you'll find this is a good opportunity for you to join, to learn from teachers all around Vietnam and international countries also. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 5th webinar of the webinar series on professional developments for English language teachers in Vietnam. Engage, empower, and excel ELT teaching and learning through digital tools and pedagogies, hosted by SEAMEO RETRAC in Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, and sponsored by Regional English Language Office, U.S. Embassy in Hanoi. Last webinar, we learned about optimizing project-based learning in ELT. And this week, as I shared with you earlier, there are 4 C's in English language teaching, which are creativity, critical thinking, communication, and collaboration. And today we will explore 2 among them, which are critical thinking and creativity. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Miss Christina Cavat, RELO's English language specialist from University of Central Florida, United States, for this webinar. Christina, are you ready? So let's go.
I am. Thank you very much. It sounds like you have some wonderful professional development coming up. I know Betsy Parrish, who you were mentioning, is going to be doing your online community of practice. So excellent, excellent opportunities that you have in front of you. So it's hard to believe that we only have 2 sessions left together. And I loved hearing your impressions of how you're applying some of what you're learning and bringing back to your schools. So bravo to all of you on that. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. And today we're going to actually be doing something a little different in the sense that our entire presentation today is going to be through Nearpod. So we've been talking a lot about Nearpod. I've heard some great comments on Nearpod and some great reflections and creations of lessons. So here, what I'm doing is putting the whole presentation in Nearpod, and this is going to have 2 purposes. One, you're going to see how an entire presentation can be given, or an entire lecture can be given in Nearpod. But also it's going to allow us a little smoother transition and engagement. So I encourage you to please join this code. So remember, you're going to go to either your Nearpod app if you have one, or you can open another window on your desktop, and you're going to go to join.nearpod.com, and our code there is DQ4J3. Okay, so DQ4J3 is our code. Okay, and I'm seeing many of you jumping in there now, so I appreciate that. So our code is not going to go away. I'm going to X this out right now, but what's going to happen with our code, it's going to go in the upper center. So you're going to see it right here as I X that out. So you're going to see the code right here. Okay, so that code is not going to disappear. Okay, it's not going to disappear. So let's get started. And as Mr. Lin said, we are going to be exploring critical thinking and creativity in ELT, teaching and learning. And, you know, just as always, this is by attending this, you're allowing me to use your image. I did do a few snapshots when we were turning our cameras on and talking, so I'll be excited to share those with my colleagues at the Department of State in the English language programs. So today, welcome back. And our agenda is, we will do a quick review of some of the key ideas of webinars 1 through 4. Now, hopefully you have seen that we are actually building, right? So at first we were just talking about the landscape, then we experienced things as a student. Now we're moving to experiencing things as a teacher. We're actually creating, and in 2 weeks, we're going to be assessing. Okay, so we've been doing a lot of creating and how we can use this tool, how we can use that tool. But assessment is very, very important. We'll be addressing that next week. I'll cover the 4 C's of 21st century teaching, but we're going to focus on 2 of them, as Mr. Lin said. We're going to focus on critical thinking in ELT teaching and learning. And we'll talk about what is that and what tools we can use to build critical thinking. Then we'll look at creativity in ELT teaching and learning, and we'll focus on some tools to build creativity. We will also, as I always like to leave about 10-15 minutes at the end for our questions and answers. Love to hear your impressions. We'll be using lots of tools today. We'll be focusing on a couple new tools as well. And so we'll get a chance to look at those. So in webinar 1, you may remember that we really laid the foundation for all the webinars to follow. We talked about some considerations for technology. Are we really using technology, or are we integrating it? So hopefully what you've seen through the last 4 webinars is ways that we integrate technology. Okay, we let the technology work for us. We decide what is our purpose in using the tool. Is it management? Is it teaching and learning? Pretty soon we're going to get to assessment. Okay. And then we also really dug deep into 4 tools during that webinar: Flipgrid, TED-Ed, Khan Academy, and Nearpod. In webinar 2, then, once we had the foundation of what does it really mean to integrate technology and looking at purposes of tools, we then talked about the recipe for success. So we have a great teacher, we have great technology, but we have to have great pedagogy as well, right? So we have to know why we're using that tool, in what mode, okay, or what modality is best. And so we talked about the pedagogies of blended learning and flipped learning. Are we using the tools to support what's happening in the classroom, or are we flipping the classroom and using the tools to hopefully, teach something to the students before they come to class? Are we using it for hybrid or high flex pedagogies, for virtual learning environment, like in a asynchronous mode, or live online learning, as in what we're doing right now? And in webinar 3, we looked at ways for students to engage in class. And we talked about 3 types of engagement: behavioral, emotional, and cognitive. So looking from the perspective of an educator, from a teacher, how do we build behavioral engagement? We talked about strategies: making learning active, building in peer-to-peer learning, utilize microlearning, and personalizing learning. And we looked at emotional engagement, building that community of learners, using collaborative tools, engaging in gamification or races. And then that cognitive engagement, really scaffolding our content, building in time for microlearning, thinking about chunk, chew, and check, presenting information in small pieces, giving students time to work with it, and then checking students' understanding of it. We also talked about using assessment reports. So you'll notice there, we're really focused on pedagogy and building engagement, and we're letting the tools work for us, rather than saying, I'm going to use this tool and what can I do with it? No, we're deciding we want to build emotional engagement. So let's look at the best tool we can have to do that. So always focus on pedagogy. And 2 weeks ago, we did dive into project-based learning. And I shared with you a very popular framework for TESOL project-based learning. So really working on thinking about planning the project. What's the type of the project? What tools do we need? How can we access the tools? Then we looked at introducing the project, presenting a problem, and building background knowledge and language. And we looked at tools like TED-Ed and Nearpod for that. We talked about working on the project, collaborating, researching, building language lessons. We looked at tools like Padlet, Nearpod, Google Jamboard. And then the presentation of the project. How is this going to be presented? Is it going to be presented in class or online? And I shared with you some tools, Book Creator. And also we talked about Flipgrid and Animoto and Glockster. And lastly, assessment and reflection. Shared with you and posted it on our platform, the rubrics by PBL Works, and giving class feedback. And we talked about tools like Nearpod, Jamboard, and Padlet. And one thing I just want to stress with the project-based learning, we're not going to use probably just one tool for all pieces of project-based learning. We have to think about each piece of the project and what tools work best for that. Okay, so real critical part of project-based learning, maybe just not one tool for every piece of the project, right? Maybe several tools we're going to bring in. So here we are in Nearpod, and I'd like to just hear from you. Do you see yourself using this tool, and how will you use it? So these are the tools we really looked at 2 weeks ago. So you can just put, under each column there, type in, or you can use your finger if you're on a mobile device. Do you see yourself using this tool, and how might you use this? So I'll give you a minute to engage in this activity. And just to give you an update here, I just moved over to the teacher screen. So as the teacher, I'm able to see your drawings and what's happening. I'm seeing who's working on it, how it's been submitted. Okay, so we'll just take a look at this. So here we have, using Nearpod to engage students, right? And we talked a lot about Nearpod and engagement. Okay. And I'm seeing a lot about the tools you're using, maybe not how you're going to use them. So yeah, I see Padlet here, and I'd like to use it to let students introduce about themselves. Excellent. Lots of tools I think we're going to be using, hopefully in the new year here, new academic year. So we have Nearpod, Padlet, and Jamboard to create interesting lessons and activities. Okay, so yeah, I see lots of you using tools, using a lot of the tools. A good number of you I see are wanting to use Nearpod. So I can use Nearpod as a tool to present lessons, save them. Padlet is used to show students works. Speak Creator is used for creating. So very nice there. And we're going to see how today we're going to bring actually Flipgrid into Nearpod, because Flipgrid and Nearpod work well together. Okay, so the 4 C's of 21st century learning. Here we are, right? The 4 C's. So as Mr. Lin said, we know that the 4 C's are communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity. And these have been called the cornerstone of successful learning. So the cornerstone. So in order for students to learn, these 4 pieces need to be part of the learning process. And it's interesting because now we're seeing a 5th C. Okay, we're seeing something called connection, right? And this has grown out of COVID and how many of us have not been maybe directly connected with our students. So we're seeing this 5th C, and I'll touch on this a little bit as we talk about both critical thinking and creativity, because I really think that this 5th C connection can be built into each one of these, right? And we can use the tools to build in connection to each piece of this cornerstone. So just like I always do, I like to give you a big bird's eye view of where we are and what tools we can use. So communication is really about concisely articulating a thought or idea. And this is so important in ELT teaching and learning, right? So some tools that we can use for this might be our learning management systems, Padlet, Nearpod, Jamboard, right? When we really want to concisely articulate an idea. Collaboration is the ability to work with others and accomplish a goal. So again, if we think about, the tools we've talked about, Padlet, Nearpod, Jamboard, Google Suite, all of the tools really build that collaboration and connection. That 5th C as well is built in with a lot of those. Then critical thinking. It's really about the ability to solve problems, make inferences, draw conclusions, analyze, and evaluate. And today we'll look at something called Nucella. And that can be paired with Vocabulary Grabber, and it can also be paired with Nearpod. So we'll really look deeply into those pieces today. Creativity is not about like how artistic our students are, but it's really about how they're thinking. Are they able to think, as we say, outside the box? So can they repurpose content and recreate content in new contexts, right? And we're going to talk about and look at Book Creator closer. I'm sorry, we're going to look at Animoto closer. We looked at Book Creator last week or 2 weeks ago, Flipgrid, And there's also something called Adobe Spark, Adobe Express, and Canva. So these are some tools we can use to build creativity. So going back to critical thinking, right? Critical thinking. And when we think about critical thinking, this is an old definition, but I still think it very much applies to what happens in our classes today. So critical thinking is the ability of an individual to take charge of their own thinking and develop appropriate criteria and standards for analyzing their own thinking. So there's a lot there in that definition, you know, taking charge of our own thinking. So being an autonomous learner, right? Being an autonomous learner. But with that means not just that we're learning on our own, but we're able to take criteria and standards and we're able to apply it in various situations. So when we think about that in ELT, we have to realize that it's a very complex process, right? Because we're asking students not to do it in their first language, but we're asking them to do it in another language. And so this involves a lot of reflection, a lot of analysis, and a lot of evaluation, right? But it goes beyond just language, and that might be what we refer to as cognitive domains, right? It goes far beyond just the linguistics. When we think about critical thinking in ELT, it also affects what we call, or it also includes what we call the affective domains. And this is, you know, how comfortable a student feels in that target language. So, you know, not only do they have to have the language skills to critically think, but they also have to be comfortable, okay, using that target language. And lastly, when we talk about critical thinking in ELT, we also have to think about the cultural knowledge of the target learning environment. And in an EFL context, in your situation, teaching students in Vietnam, that may not be as prominent as the linguistic domain. However, cultural domain is very, very important if a student's going to be coming over or working in an English-speaking environment. And, you know, just being aware of the cultural knowledge of that target learning environment. So critical thinking is very complex in ELT because it's not only thinking about students taking charge of their own thinking, but it's in that target language. So we're just going to do a little quiz here, and I'm going to ask you just 3 questions in this quiz you're going to see in a minute. And I want you to tell me if that statement, if you believe it's a myth or a fact. So you just have 3 statements about critical thinking. A myth, something that people believe, but it's not necessarily true, or is it a fact? Okay, so you have a little quiz here. So I'm going to hide your names there. So go ahead and just answer those questions for me. So let's see if we think these things are myths or facts. Okay, so interesting that we're about split here between some of our myths and facts. So let's look at these one by one. I see some of you are still engaging with it, but for the sake of time, I'm going to move on. And let's unpack each of these statements. So the first statement, critical thinking can only be embedded in higher level English for academic purposes courses. And this is a myth. We can embed critical thinking even in primary school, where students may not even have reading and writing abilities at that point, right? So critical thinking can be embedded from the very beginning of learning. And we're going to see how we can do that today. Okay. The second point was critical thinking should take place at the end of a lesson after language has been taught. And this is also a myth. Okay, I'm going to show you today how you can even teach critical thinking at the very beginning of the lesson, that you can use critical thinking as a way to teach language. Okay, so we're going to look at that today also. And the last one, also a myth, okay, that to teach critical thinking means to teach learning strategies. No, okay, so also a myth. And we're going to look at, again, the pieces of teaching critical thinking and how we can embed this in every lesson we give, okay? And how we probably should embed it in every lesson that we give. Okay, so look at these two tasks, if you will. So you're going to see this right here. And then tell me what's different about these. What's different about these tasks? So you can see that, you know, they're both doing the same thing. They're both going over vocabulary of playing soccer, doing yoga, going fishing. What's the difference in these tasks? So you can just type a short answer in your Nearpod for me. Okay, can't see the box chart. So hopefully you see it on my screen. What you do is you actually click on the image on your Nearpod, and that will open up big for you. So you should be able to click on that image. So right here, when I see the image up here, if I click on it, it will increase for me. So from the student perspective, right here, click on it. Okay. And then you should see it nice and big. Okay. So I'm going to go back to teacher mode. And I'm seeing that the first one is more about controlled practice, while the second gives students more space to think. Ooh, I love that, giving space to think. The second task requires critical thinking to complete. Yes. Okay. For task 1, it's used to teach kids. Task U is usually to teach teenagers. Oh, interesting. Okay. One is set up to strategy, and the other is like activities that should be applied in order for students to improve their critical thinking skills. The first one does not need much thinking. And the second one, the students have to think more. Absolutely. Number 2 is for critical thinking. Okay. The second task makes chances for students to think. In the first task, there's a high chance they would not be bothered about the rules. Excellent. Yes. Okay. The first one is more exciting. The second is about grammar. Interesting. Okay. So I'm going to go back to student mode, and we're going to look at this again. So if we look at the first task, this is what we might call drill and kill in materials development. Drill and kill. So it's just basic, maybe route memorization, right? Where students might just be memorizing, I don't like play golf. It's a sport for old people, right? Where in the next one, I have to actually understand what each of those vocabulary items really means for me to be able to accomplish the task, okay? So again, really understanding what the target language means before, and then doing an activity that shows my ability not only to understand the item, but to really be able to apply it in another situation. And that's what critical thinking is in ELT. Now, most of the time, we see things like this in our textbooks, right? We don't really see too much of the second type of exercise in our textbooks. But it's really important to create the second type of activity. Once you teach the language, allowing students to really show that they can understand the terminology. And that was a very simple example, but I think it illustrates the difference between just route memorization, students just remembering it for that moment, and students really understanding and being able to apply it. That's critical thinking, okay? That's critical thinking. So, you know, big difference between those two kinds of activities. So some guiding principles when we think about creativity and ELT and critical thinking and creativity is that students need to engage in critical thinking in all levels. It needs to go beyond examples, right? So we need, no matter if they're a pre-K learner, a first grade learner, or a university learner, they need to be engaged in critical thinking. And we need to provide space. There needs to be a deliberate set time for students to work on critical thinking. So, we know that language learners are more successful when they think critically, okay? So we're more likely to acquire language and be a successful language learner when we can critically think. What that means is we're not just, again, memorizing that content for that moment. We're able to learn the content and apply it in a different situation. That's critical thinking, right? And then the practice has to be spiraled throughout a class. So we don't want to just build in one activity for critical thinking. We have to make sure that we're building up to critical thinking and different uses of critical thinking throughout that course. And students must practice transferring critical thinking skills to other contexts. So if we are making a prediction about one particular story, that we're able to make predictions about all stories, even though the prediction may be different, right? So these are really guiding principles for critical thinking. So we're going to go over some classroom strategies now and really look at how we can create these strategies in our classes with different tools. So one way to really begin and set the tone for critical thinking in your classroom is providing statements where students can agree or disagree, and even providing sentence framers for giving reasons for that. So let's just try this together, and then we're going to talk about how we can expand this activity in our classrooms. Okay, so you're going to see that you have a statement there. Learning English is easy. Do you agree or disagree? Why or why not? Okay, so imagine you post this your very first day in English class. And again, you can ask students this orally as well. Okay, I'm hoping to get a few more comments here, a few more posts. I'm going to just move back and move forward because sometimes they don't all load. Oh, there we go. That's what I want to see. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I agree. Just simply, I agree. I disagree because I have a lot of new words, to learn a lot of new words and much grammar. If you're patient, learning English is not a matter. Learning English is not difficult if we know how to study. I don't agree because it needs time, effort, and patience. I partly agree. Okay, I extremely disagree. Love that. I agree if this class is about 20 to 30 students. Learning English is not easy because there are students in high school struggle with the subject. The problem carries on to their university years. Okay, yes and no. So I agree. I partly agree. I disagree. I disagree because I can't remember words. Okay, it's not easy to learn English because it's complex in grammar and flexible in vocabulary. So true. Sometimes it's rather difficult in pronunciation writing. It depends on each person, but for me, it's a lifelong learning process. I disagree because this is a long-term process of learning and needs to make a lot of attempts to master English. I agree. Unlike other language, English has no cases, no gender, and has simple grammar system. Good. Actually, it's hard solving. It depends on the aim and interests of learners. I agree. I don't agree. So let's just look at some of these. You'll see some answered the second part of the question, why or why not? But there are others that just said, I agree, I disagree, I partly agree, right? So a big difference in the expectation here on the learner's part, if they need to critically think through this. The why or why not is actually building my critical thinking, okay? But before we go on to that and talk about it more, there's one other thing I'd like to point out in Nearpod. So you may have noticed that I recorded my answer, right? So I have the option of using an audio file. So students don't have to write in Nearpod. They can also add an audio file. So if you look here, I'm just going to use my tool right here on this bar. Okay, I have the option to choose a picture. I can even do a video of myself, very much like a Flipgrid, okay? Or I can add an audio file, okay? So when we use Nearpod, we don't want to just get fixed on using just the text. We can teach students early on to use the video or audio file. And that's really works well if you're trying to build pronunciation. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out, that you can use a simple audio file. Learning. Okay, so that's just me doing a recording. Okay. And one thing I want to point out, because you're in Nearpod right now, because this whole presentation is Nearpod, you will see a down arrow on your Nearpod device that will allow you to take notes. Okay, so you can make notes and send them to yourself also. Okay, so just wanted to point that out. But getting back to our critical thinking. So looking at the difference between just simply, I agree, and there's also a difference here, I disagree because I can't remember words, and learning English is not easy because there are students in high school who struggle with the subject. The problem carries on in their university years. In all three of these, we see different levels of critical thinking. Okay, so what can you do as an educator? Well, let's say, you know, a student gives just a simple, you know, I don't know. You know, we get this a lot. Either I'm not interested, I don't know, I'm not sure. So the language that we use to follow up with that student can build critical thinking. So, okay, but do you have an opinion? Or why aren't you sure? Okay, so we can follow up with that. Now, what about the student who just simply says, I agree, it's true, I disagree, it's not true? Great, you have an opinion, but why do you think that? So I'm going to jump back a little bit. So as a teacher, if I'm using a digital tool, okay, and somebody would say, I partly agree, okay, why do you only partly agree? Which pieces do you agree with? Which pieces do you disagree with? Okay, so I might prompt the student a little more with my framers now. Now I'm asking, so I'm trying to draw out that critical thinking in the student. Okay, so again, how are the students answering, and what is your response? Okay, and what is your response there? Now, let's say as a student says, I agree, I disagree because, I might follow up and say, great, you have a reason for your opinion. That's really important. Okay, maybe a student says, I agree, I disagree because, but I'd like to know if, or the one we saw about students later struggling in university. We might respond with, excellent, you have an opinion and you want to better understand the issue. or you have an opinion and you understand that it continues to be a problem for students later in university. Okay, so my response as a teacher to just a simple question can help set the groundwork for building creativity in the classroom. Okay, so do you, and I see a question here, do you think that Nearpod is widely used or not? Support your ideas by facts, you know. Is this a question with critical thinking? The second part of that question is a critical thinking question. Is this a question, do you support your ideas by facts, you know? That's a critical thinking question, because what happens there is I'm asking students to apply knowledge they have about something in a new context. So anytime I do that, that's building critical thinking. Now, just asking that question, do you think, when I can answer yes or no, that's not critical thinking, okay? But when I'm giving my reasons why, now that's critical thinking, right? And a lot of times in language, we just ask for the simple answer, but we don't ask the why. So it's about the why. And, you know, using these teacher responses becomes so important for that. So a second strategy is, you know, providing students with a list of items or pictures and having them categorize the list. And you saw that example when I asked you what was the difference. So in a beginning level class, maybe I have lots of sports and I ask the students to, you know, just tell me what are the individual sports and what are the team sports. So even though my goal is to teach them the names of the sports, if I'm getting them to differentiate, that's critical thinking. So now they have to not only understand the name of the sport, but they have to really understand its true meaning, right? And that's going to be shown in the differentiation. In an intermediate class, I might have a list of items they buy at the supermarket and a list of items they buy at a department store. So now I really have to understand the true meaning of those vocabulary items, and they have to show me that they can apply that in a real situation. In the advanced class, I might have some adjectives and adverbs, and I might ask them to tell me what's the difference between concrete language and vague language. So if I use words like good versus brilliant, okay, good is a very vague term, but brilliant is a very concrete term. I have the word a lot. And then maybe I have the word multitude. Now I'm getting my students to really understand the different contexts of those terminologies. So let's try this together here, this classroom strategy. And what you're going to see is, and this is a simple exercise that I created in Nearpod. So as the student, first you see this video, and this video is on irregular verbs. So maybe I ask the students to watch the video, and then they have to write, match the past tense form of the irregular verb to its present form. Well, this one actually, oh, I'm sorry, I put the wrong video here. This one is actually, this video should be the endings for S. So what I'm asking students to do now is to differentiate, okay? They're gonna differentiate, so they're gonna drag where it goes. So go ahead and just try this. And I apologize, I'm not sure why my video there is wrong. I have the ED video there when I wanted the S video. So go ahead and just try this as a student. Okay, so you'll see, you know, some of you dragged them in. So we have puts, works, laughs, loves, runs. Okay, so studies and misses are over here, and watches and brushes. Let me go back to this, to the student mode. So watches is here, studies is here, brushes is here, misses is here, puts, loves, runs, laughs, works. Now, obviously my students have to use critical thinking. They have to take what they know about the rules and apply it. But I can extend the critical thinking in this exercise as well. I can ask students why. Why is loves here and not here? So I can ask them the why. If they're able to answer the why, not only do they really understand the rules, but they're using critical thinking. They're using critical thinking. Yes, I'm sorry, studies is here, my bad. Okay. And I can ask my students why? Because it ends in a vowel sound, right? It ends in a vowel sound. So again, I can take a simple activity, and this might be an activity in a textbook, and I can extend that. So as the teacher, the questions I ask can help really build critical thinking. The questions I ask that are outside the textbook, right? And using a tool like Nearpod is great for that. So then when we look at a third strategy, you know, we read a lot in ELT, right? We ask our students to do a lot of reading. And so we often, you know, ask some questions related to the reading. Now, sometimes it's good to ask questions that are not so obvious in the text, or what might be in a textbook, right? So I'm going to show two new tools. We actually touched on these tools, I think, in our very, very first webinar. I mentioned them, but I want to share with them, with them today. And one tool is called Newsela, and one tool is called Project Gutenberg. So Newsela is, it has both a free and a paid option. Obviously, with the paid option, you get a little bit more, but with the free option, you get plenty of content. So these are great tools for reading, and even for our low-level students, for our early learners, we have audio options also. So it's also good for listening. Project Gutenberg is a collection of, I don't know, thousands and thousands of free books, okay? And many of these free books have audio as well. So we're going to be looking at two examples for critical thinking and answering the question, what's the problem? So this is a very good strategy to use in the classroom. And these are two tools in which you can use these strategies for free. Okay. So I put my link in, but it doesn't work there. So I'm going to go to my link here. So here's a story called Hugo and the Seal. Okay. It's a short story. It's only, 1,200 words. So you can see not a very long story. But how can I use this to build critical thinking? Well, when I begin any story in class, I always want to ask students first just to look at pictures and make a prediction. So I would ask my students here, look at this picture. What do you think is going on? Or what do you think is going to happen? What's the boy doing? That right there builds critical thinking, right? That builds critical thinking. Then I have another picture. What's the boy doing? Okay, why is the boy doing this? Okay, and let the students create a story then, even before I begin the story. So this story obviously has a little bit of a problem in it, and I can ask the student, what's the problem? What's the problem? So instead of, saying what is happening, what is happening is just students using information that's there. When I ask what's the problem, now students have to use information that's not there, right? And that's where I'm going to build critical thinking in. Okay, so Nucella has many, many stories on there, and you can even do it by grade level or by reading level. Okay, it could be read aloud, so students could have a read aloud where they hear the story. But you'll notice over here, okay, is my Educator Center. So, you know, I have my account here. I have just a free account. And in my account, I'll just go and show you. In my account, I have actually stories that I've saved. These are stories that I want to use in my class, okay? Stories I've saved. And I can assign these stories to my class. So I can create an assignment or add it to an existing assignment. So if I click this story, what I want you to notice over here are the activities. The activities. So these are reading comprehensions. And here is Nucella's prompt. So here is Nucella's prompt. Choose 2 characters from the text and analyze how they are similar and or different. So I love their prompts because they really build critical thinking. But if I wanted to change the prompt, I have that ability. I can change my own, I can change the questions that they built in. So if I come across a question that doesn't have a lot of critical thinking, I can create a question for critical thinking, okay? I can do the same with a quiz. Okay, so I can change any of the quiz questions. I have the ability to edit. Okay, so maybe that question's fine. Maybe I want to go to the next question. Okay, so I'm able to modify. I'm able to modify anything I want in there. Okay, great tool. For getting some great readings where students can engage in it. Okay, so great tool, Nucella, and we're going to look at this again in a minute. Okay, I can put it in present mode so it would play big on my screen. So that's Nucella. Okay, and I think that my my other story will work. Yeah, so here's Project Gutenberg. And just to let you know what, again, Project Gutenberg has over 60,000 free ebooks, okay? And you can search many ways. You can search on Project Gutenberg, okay? So they're all free books and they have audio as well. So when I go to Project Gutenberg, this is the page I land on, okay? And I like to use the search and browse tool up here, the search and browse tool. And I really like the bookshelves. So this describes how the books are organized, okay? As you can see, I hit the children's bookshelf a lot. So if you're working with children, the children's bookshelf is great for you. And there are so many books. This is just children Christmas, okay? But if I look just at children's, you're gonna see that I have, oh, this is still children's Christmas, not sure why that's happening. You're gonna see that I have lots to choose from, okay? Lots to choose from here, okay? So let me go to children's fiction. Lots and lots of things to choose from, okay? So I have for you, let's see, that's the audio file. Here's Sleeping Beauty, for example. I can read this book online, okay? I can get an EPUB with images. That means the pictures will be there, or no images. And more files. This is where I would have some audio files if available. So you can download the book, you can share the book, you can post it in your digital environment for your classes. But Project Gutenberg, really nice website to find readers for students, authentic readers. So remember, when we're doing these kind of projects, we want to ask those questions that are not there. We always want to find out the why, right? And being able to change some of those. So another classroom strategy I like to build critical thinking is for students to create the ending. So you may want to read up to a certain point in the story and then have students find the ending of the story, or work in partners and create their own ending to the story. Again, using Nucella and Project Gutenberg are great examples of this. And so I'm going to show you a great story I love, and we're going to be building lessons around this one, is called Finding Dinner at the Farmer's Market. Okay, so imagine that I've been teaching students things like partitives, a loaf of bread, a bunch of carrots, a head of lettuce, right? I've been teaching in those grammatical terms. So I would have students read the story. Again, I would start probably out looking at the pictures, making predictions with the pictures, you know, what's happening, where are they going, what do you think they're going to buy, okay? So making those predictions, okay? Maybe just looking at this picture and asking students, what are they going to be preparing for dinner tonight? Okay, why do you think they're preparing that for dinner? Okay, so I would have students read it, and then we would stop at the very, close to the very end, okay? And I'm gonna ask students then to create an ending to the story, okay? Now this is using critical thinking because the students have to use what they know from the story, but they also have to use their own background knowledge and what would happen next, okay? So making those predictions. So using this is a great tool. I can even build it in here where I ask students, you know, I edit it and say, what do you think is going to happen next? Why? Okay, so again, what do you think is happening next is a prediction. That's critical thinking. And the why is also a critical thinking. Okay, so building that right in there. Now, the same is true when I can use Gutenberg. So this is an excerpt from a story. So the great thing about the audio files in Project Gutenberg is they're usually not the entire book. It's usually like a chapter, right? So in this case, I could play this audio file of one chapter, and then I could ask that same question of students. What do you think is going to happen next and why? So using the audio files from Project Gutenberg. So I'll just play a little bit of this so you can get a sense of the audio.
Most terribly cold it was. It snowed and was nearly quite dark and evening, the last evening of the year. In this cold and darkness there went along the street a poor little girl, bareheaded and with naked feet. When she left home she had slippers on, it is true, but what was the good of that? They were very large slippers which her mother had hitherto worn. So large were they, and the poor little thing lost them as she scuffled away across the street because of two carriages that rolled by dreadfully fast.
So I could even stop right there and ask students, why do you think the girl is out on the street by herself? Where do you think she lost her slippers? Why do you think she's wearing slippers that are so big? Not only am I working on language there, but I'm also building that critical thinking, okay? Also building that critical thinking. So you will have access to this Nearpod in our Tech for Teach platform. So you can actually go ahead and click some of those files yourself. So you'll have access to all of those if you want to use any of those. So let's talk about another strategy here. And this is graphic organizers, right? So we know graphic organizers help to identify relationships, but they also help students see connections between ideas, right? And that identifying connections and identifying relationships is a big part of critical thinking. This can be done with a reading or a listening. I actually love to do these with listenings, having students draw those conclusions between ideas in a listening. So I'm just reading some of your comments in the chat box. Those are great ways to build critical thinking. We want to map the relationships, or we want to outline organization of something. A new tool for you is MindOmo. So MindOmo, and I'm just going to jump to my MindOmo because again, it won't let me embed. So MindOmo is, I'll just hit the home page for you. Oh, I'm in my teacher account. So it allows you to create different graphic organizers, okay? They have several templates, or you can create your own. So I'm just gonna show you a few ways in which you can use MindOmo. So MindOmo here might be, let me cross out of this one. So what you're going to see is a weekly planner here, and maybe I can organize, maybe they're reading about a student's everyday activities, and they might put in all the activities the students do on a date. Okay, so I can add that one. So for example, I just added exercise, right? I can also share these out, and I'll show you those in a minute. Okay, but I'm going to go back to mine. Here's a very simple one on maybe having students complete a mind map on their future. What's their future going to be? Okay, and they can type in things. Okay, I'm going to be a doctor, maybe. Okay, maybe I'm going to have a big family. Okay, so students are able to type in here. So if they're reading a story about somebody and the story is what the student's going to be doing in the future, they can show all those relationships in MindOmo. Okay, so when you go to MindOmo, as I said, it is a free account. You can create, and when you're creating, it's giving you lots of different templates and even some use cases. So some of the grammar ones might be very helpful. These are already done, but they can be modified, right? They can be modified. So those might be helpful as well. Literature and writing might be very, very helpful if you're having students read a story and then they're filling in some information, or if they're even going to be creating their own stories. So really great templates that they have there. Okay, I can create a blank diagram, and with a blank diagram, I might, it comes in, I'm not going to upgrade now, but I don't want to upgrade now. I just want to create my blank diagram. Oh, that one's just a paid one. There are many that I can create here, some with some interactive activities as well. And you're going to see I've used this favorite things once before. So here's the favorite things. I can print this, even let students complete this. So very great for any kind of reading or listening where you're getting students to identify those relationships, because that's so important for building critical thinking, for getting them to understand how things are related to one another in a reading or a listening. So let's talk about building an entire critical thinking lesson. So when we're building a critical thinking lesson, we have to first build background knowledge. So we have to see, what do students already know about the topic? And then we have to engage students in that topic. We often are going to do a reading or a listening then. And then we're going to extend the content for analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And I think the real important part here to understand is each of these pieces needs to have a critical thinking element. So when I'm building background knowledge, I'm also going to get students to think critically about a topic. Okay, when I'm engaging students, I want them again to think critically. Remember those why questions. When they're reading and listening, maybe I'm going to give them something, a targeted question that I want them to be able to find an answer to, but something that they have to think critically through, not just a simple yes, no. And then obviously the extension is going to be critical thinking. So we can build a whole lesson like this in Nearpod. Okay, so here's an example, and I'm going to go back to that same story I shared with you from Nucella. Okay, and this is the farmer's market. So I'm going to ask students to look at the picture, and first, where do you think the girl and her father are? So if you just give me a short answer in that box, that would be great. So we're going to simulate this just as we would do in the class. So this is stage one. Stage one is building background knowledge. So go ahead and type your answers in there. So look at the picture. Where do you think the girl and her father are? Okay, so I'm seeing some different answers. The flower shop, in the market, at the market, going grocery, farmer's market, at the market, they're in the supermarket, grocery store, in the market, supermarket. Okay, so throwing back here, if somebody says flower shop, I'm going to follow up with one of those teacher questions. Why do you think they're at the flower shop? And the student might say, well, there are flowers behind them. But I might say then, what do they have in their bags? What do they have in their bags? Getting students to make a connection between flowers and the items in their bag, but also getting students to make a connection between what they see in the image, in the big image, and what they see in the small image. So many of you said market. I would probably follow up with something like, what kind of market are they at? Okay, and get students to distinguish between what we would call maybe a supermarket or grocery store and a farmer's market. So, you know, my question was very, very vague, because what I want to be able to do is follow up with that question and seeing if students can distinguish between these two pictures, right, with the language they have, So I see some things in the chat. Organic. Yeah, Mind-O-Mo is a great tool. We're going to see that again in a minute. So the next part of my lesson then would be to remember we did the brainstorming. Now I'm building some background knowledge here. Okay, asking students if they've been to a farmer's market. I have a picture here. Okay, and then what did they buy there? So again, part of building that background knowledge and engaging students in the topic. So go ahead and participate in this one for me. Okay, now what I've done here is I've gotten students to engage, right? They have a good understanding, hopefully, of what farmers market is. And now I'm asking them their personal experience with the farmers market, right? So application here, and we can follow up other than what did you buy there, what other things does a farmer's market sell? Okay, what other things does a farmer's market sell? So I can follow up with that type of question. Now I'm going to engage students even further, and I'm using what we learned about language and getting them to apply it in a new context. So this is just a matching activity in Nearpod. So again, it looks like maybe a review of some language we use, but if we think about critical thinking, maybe students only learned, you know, a box of crackers. They didn't maybe learn a box of spaghetti. So I'm getting them to apply it in a new context. I'm using something different that they've, you know, than what they actually learned in class, right? But they have to be able to make those connections. So go ahead and try this matching activity. Oh, I see many of you already have. Great. Okay. And we're doing awesome with these. Okay. So here we're getting a bunch of flowers. Okay. A head of lettuce. Okay. A loaf of bread. A box of spaghetti, and a bag of apples, right? So preparing my students for the reading, but at the same time building critical thinking, right? Okay, and I'm going to use this device only. So what I've done is I've actually recorded the story, part of the story. So remember, going back to creating a whole lesson around critical thinking, first, we have to build that background knowledge, making sure that we're asking the right questions, right? Then we have to engage the learners, getting them to apply things that they already know in a new scenario. And now we're presenting the reading or the listening. So I've just created a listening from this. How about speaking? Okay, so I realize it's probably a little low, but basically what I did is I recorded this audio. Okay, so I recorded this audio, but I stopped before the ending. I stopped before the ending. Okay, and now I'm asking students, which items did they buy? What are they missing? Okay, so they have to not only say, okay, this is what I heard, but they also have to recognize what they didn't hear. Okay, which is a way to build critical thinking. So then students would engage in this activity. Okay, and they can listen again. I've put the listening up here again in case they needed it. This can also be a reading. It doesn't have to just be a listening. Okay, so students would engage with that. What did they hear? Okay, what did they hear? And just to give away the story a little bit is they, in the end of the story, they actually forget, they want to make spaghetti, but they actually forget to buy spaghetti. Okay. So even though they hear the word spaghetti, they're not actually buying spaghetti. And so this is a great way to build critical thinking, because they buy the bread, they buy the cheese, they buy the flowers, they buy tomatoes, they buy basil. They talk about making spaghetti, but they never buy spaghetti. They actually forget to buy spaghetti. And so this is a great activity for critical thinking, for engaging students in something. So they're going to read the story then, and they're going to circle all the ingredients as they read, okay, so that they can see that they didn't buy spaghetti. And then I want to extend it. So remember, when we're talking about building critical thinking in a classroom lesson, we want to brainstorm, we want to build background knowledge, we want to engage, we want to present some kind of reading or listening. And then you know, oftentimes in the ELT classroom, that's where we stop. But what we really need to do is extend the reading, extend the listening. And so here's a way in which the students can do that. They're going to read the story. They're going to circle all the ingredients. And then they're going to work with a group, and maybe they're going to plan a dinner. They have to create a shopping list for the items they need to buy. They need to indicate how much or how many they need to buy. And again, this is just a lesson that's targeted at practicing those partitives, okay? So 3 bunches of carrots. So we're going to be applying partitives maybe with different foods, and that is going to show their true understanding of partitives, things like bunches. Okay, so that was critical thinking. And now we're going to jump to creativity. And obviously, you know, creativity has to do with students thinking about things in different and new ways. And that's really built into a lot of what we've seen already. So creativity is the ability to produce new, diverse, and unique ideas. So thinking creatively means looking at things from a different perspective and not being restricted by rules, customs, or norms. So we always say thinking outside the box. And in ELT, what does this mean? Well, we need to use a wide range of idea creation techniques, such as brainstorming, right? So we need to really think about how can we build this in to our language lessons. And brainstorming is a very obvious way to do this. We also have to create new and worthwhile ideas in ELT. And that often means that we have to ask students to elaborate, refine, analyze, evaluate their own ideas to improve and maximize their creative efforts. And we need to act on creative ideas to build innovation. Now, one of my favorite ways to build creativity in ELT classrooms is to use project-based learning that we talked about 2 weeks ago. So project-based learning or problem-based learning or inquiry-based learning are all excellent ways that are going to build creativity because we're asking students to solve problems in new ways, right? And some strategies then are definitely those project-based, problem-based learning, okay? Again, I think that the whole beginning of project-based learning and problem-based learning was to get students to think differently about something, to see other solutions, right, than what has already been designed. But how do we facilitate creativity even within these kinds of projects? How can we facilitate creativity? Well, first of all, we have to go beyond the remembering and the understanding. Okay, so if we think about Bloom's taxonomy, on the very bottom is remembering and understanding. And I think we know that critical thinking definitely goes beyond remembering and understanding. But how do we do that when we're trying to build creativity? Okay, and we're gonna do all these in Nearpod in a moment. We also need to focus on action verbs. So when we think about our lessons, and we have to think about the words that we're using for what we want students to do. You know, I don't want students to simply answer, right? I want them to describe, to compare, contrast, to differentiate. I want to use action verbs, and that can really help build creativity. Okay, so one way we can do this is we can actually use action verbs around the classroom. And you're going to see that I'm using some action verbs here, and these are all posters: persisting, means stick to it, right? Persevering in a task. So using my classroom, you know, managing impulsivity, right? Take your time, okay? So posting things around my classroom can help build creativity. So these are all posters, okay, that you can post in your classroom. And I actually share these with you in our Tech for Teach platform. I have them for you in both English and Vietnamese, okay? So these are free downloads, but I think it's really valuable to have this kind of language posted around your classroom so that students get used to these kinds of verbs that are actually getting them to be creative, okay? Getting them to be creative. So again, on our Tech for Teach platform, you have access to all these posters, both in English and Vietnamese. Again, focusing on action words, getting learners, getting our students to understand these action verbs are also very important. Another way we can really facilitate creativity is to use a creativity thinking rubric. Now you're going to say, what does that look like? Well, I have one for you as well. Okay, so if we look at this, and these are done by grade level. Okay, so this is from kindergarten to second grade. And you know, I can create my own ideas for a task. So making students understand right from the beginning that creating your own ideas is valued, right? And so here it is, what it looks like in kindergarten through second grade. So we have idea generation, creative production, okay? And in grades 3 through 5, again, idea generation and openness, encouraged to explore. So I can explore new ideas, okay? And then we also have creative and productive innovation. I can use my best ideas to create a product or performance. We go to grades 6 through 8, okay? And we even get a definition of what a creative mind is, right? A powerful creator, creative thinker develops ideas, connections, and solutions to create something novel for an aesthetic or practical purpose, okay? So these are great rubrics, great rubrics. You can see as we go up in years, they're getting more extensive. And then for our grades 9 through 12, right? Idea generation and expression. And then we have openness, encouraged to explore, creative and production and innovation, and then self-reflection and agency. And that's very important. We've talked about that when we talked about engagement, but also project-based learning, that it's really important that students reflect on their own processes, right? And that again can help build creativity. Okay, so you have all of those rubrics also in your Tech for Teach platform. Okay, so those are also downloadable PDFs that you have access to. So when we think about facilitating creativity, we also have to think about flipping blooms. And we talked about flipping quite a bit when we talked about pedagogy, right? So I told you at the very beginning, one of our myths was that that critical thinking can only happen at the end of a lesson. Well, actually, critical thinking and creativity can happen from the very beginning. And we can use that to open our lesson. We can use that to open our lesson. So here's an example for you in Nearpod. that we can do. Now notice what you're going to see in Nearpod is a flip, is a flip grid. Now they just call it flip, right? They changed the name on us. So I can put a flip grid in my Nearpod lesson. Okay, so here's my flip. Okay, I think I put this project-based one, a trip to the supermarket. So I put this in here. What do you need to buy at the supermarket? Take us on a trip. So I created it in Flipgrid and I added into Nearpod. Okay, I added into Nearpod so I can join with my Microsoft. Okay, so I'm going to show you how you can create this in Nearpod. Okay, so here's my trip to the supermarket. Oh, and let me just go into another Nearpod for you so you can see how to add a flip grid, because this is a great way to get students started from the get-go. So when I create a lesson, and some of you may have played around with this already, okay, when I'm adding an activity, I have many choices here, okay? In my activities, you're gonna notice that I can add a flip grid right in my Nearpod, okay? So I have to copy and paste my Flipgrid URL. So I'm going to copy that, okay? And I'm going to put it right in my Flipgrid. Oops, I need the URL, so I apologize. Okay. So I'm going to put that right in my Nearpod. Okay, so that's in my Nearpod. I'm going to add it. So within the Nearpod now, students can have a Flipgrid. Okay, so if I want to save this lesson and preview it. Okay, I'm going to preview what this looks like in Nearpod. Okay, so students will have to sign in. Okay, and once they sign in, and they only have to sign in once. Once they sign in, then they're going to have that Flipgrid right in their Nearpod, okay, just like this. So I can add my flip right in there. And again, what this is doing, I can start out with the question, starting out with the question to build creativity and critical thinking. So some great tools for creativity are Flipgrid, as we saw, Book Creator, and Animoto. Now, Animoto, I think I introduced it to you 2 weeks ago, but I really want to show you closely what Animoto looks like. It's a great way for students to be creative, okay, but it also builds creativity, okay? So I'm going to just show you this Animoto video as we're getting ready. As we're getting ready for school to start, okay, as we're getting ready for school to start, it's a great tool for students to be able to introduce themselves and for you to introduce yourself to students as well. So I'm going to make this bigger here, and I'll just play this, and then I'll show you how to use this tool. Okay, so you saw that's a very simple video, but it's a great way for students to be creative. Okay, it's also a great way to get them to find creative ways to solve problems that may exist. Okay, so when you're in Animoto, okay, you're going to see that I have some videos here. Okay, right there, again, it allows me to create. Now, Animoto has a free version and a cost version. I'm only using the free version. Okay, so with myself, I'm only using the free version. I'm going to go ahead and create. Okay, and it's going to give me some templates. Okay, so this is a back to school greeting, educational presentation. There's so many templates here. Okay, little tutorials. Okay, or I can just start from scratch, which means I'm going to start from a blank screen. Okay, so let's say I choose an educational presentation and maybe a back to school greeting here. I'm going to choose that template. It's going to have everything there for me, except I want to be able to add my own photos and videos. So I want to first make sure that I choose some of my photos, and I can choose my photos over here. Okay, so in my project, I can click and drag photos from my own photo booth. So I could just grab my photos from my photos. I'm not going to go through all those steps, but I would grab those and they would land over here. Okay, and then with that, I can take out that image and put in my own image. I can also change the font, change the words here. Okay. Okay, so I can modify everything. Down here is my timeline that you can see. Okay, so I can expand my timeline if I want to. I can duplicate it so it will take up more time. I can cut things out of video. Okay, I can cut whole images out. It's a great way for students. This is a great tool for students to use to be creative and solve a creative problem. Again, 2 weeks ago, I showed you Book Creator, great way for project-based learning. This is another great tool for students to use for project-based learning. Again, it's free. And so my students love it, and they love to be creative with it. And they have no problem using it. It's very simple for them to use. So that's Animoto. Okay, great tool. So just on time for our questions, our thoughts, our ideas regarding the 4 C's, particularly critical thinking and creativity. Yes, I will share with you in the link. You're going to see in our platform, we have everything in there. Okay, so our platform has everything in there, and actually I'll take you over to it. And you can see all of these tools, all the resources I showed you today are there. Okay, I'm going to just log in here so I can show you all the resources that I've put in there, including resources for Animoto. So I've got my Zoom up there, so let me move my Zoom down. Okay. So if you go to your webinar 5 here, okay, you're going to see Minomo and Nucella, Minomo how-to. This walks you through how to create those graphic organizers. This is the link to Project Gutenberg. I've done several webinars on critical thinking. I did a 4-part series webinar on critical thinking. So I've actually put two links here on the webinars for you, that if you were interested in watching additional webinars on critical thinking, I put them here too. One is just a 50-minute webinar on assessing critical thinking, but we'll be addressing some of those points in our next one. Here's a link to Nucella. Here's a link to your creativity rubrics. Okay, so the rubrics for creativity. Here's a link to Animoto, and that's the Animoto, and so you'll be able to access it through there. And then lastly, you have a folder with posters for building critical thinking, and you have posters in English and Vietnamese. Okay, so you have all of that on our platform. Okay, our Tech for Teach platform with all of those resources for you. Okay, so hopefully that will help with you in getting started with critical thinking. And okay, you want to remove the, if you want to get rid of the Animoto, you have to upgrade. So you have to do the paid version. So I found though that with my students, it's not at all a problem to have that watermark there. They don't seem to mind it at all. Okay. And when you can't join the site, which site are you speaking of? And I think that's, so which site are you unable to join? Just let me know. Oh, the Tech for Teach. Okay. So I'm going to leave that up to Mr. Lin and his team if you're unable to join the Tech for Teach site. Okay, so questions, thoughts. Oh, Mr. Lin, I think you're on mute. Mr. Lin, I think you're on mute.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Christina, for a wonderful webinar. I see in the chat box another question, and I wonder if you have already answered these questions. Why or why not help students in critical thinking? And do you think that Nearpod is widely used or not? Support your ideas by facts so you know. Is this a question with critical thinking? Yeah, this is a good example of critical thinking, right?
Yeah, we actually discussed that. Yeah, it's
Yes.
definitely, the second part is definitely an excellent question of critical thinking. Yeah.
Yes.
And the first part is what we usually do. We're like, we ask these yes, no questions, right? But we really want to ask that second part of the question to build that critical thinking.
Okay, I just want to emphasize critical thinking because this is a skill that we need to integrate in English learning, and it's difficult for us to design activity that to enhance critical thinking among students. It's not easy at all. We still have some more minutes. You have any other questions to Christina? And I encourage you to please turn on your camera to make questions, please.
I will say, just as a follow-up to what Mr. Lin was saying, with critical thinking, that's going to be the responsibility of us as teachers. You know, we have great textbooks, but our textbooks really don't develop critical thinking, right? They want students just to learn, kind of at that remembering and understanding. And so we really have to take responsibility as educators to take what's in the textbook, and I always say extend what's in the textbook. Okay, so take, if you're doing a simple activity on, free time activities, we might say, which free time activities are good for young people? Which free time activities are good for older people? Now we're getting students to critically think through and go beyond that route memorization. Okay, so we have a real responsibility to build that in the classroom, because we can't expect that to be in the materials that we use.
Okay.
So a critical thinking question should start with a yes, no, then a why or why not. Yeah, we definitely, you know, our textbooks are usually doing the yes, no's. We need to be responsible for the why or why not, or even the how. How is another great critical thinking question to think about. We always think about the what's, right? We might even think about the where, but we have to ask the whys and the hows.
And now we talk about the sharing of knowledge from this webinar series to your colleagues and friends at home. I wonder if you have ever shared like the video of the webinars, or the just digital tools, or anything from this webinar to your colleagues. I know that some teachers like Miss Hương Vũ from Thăng Long School for the Gifted, Lâm Đồng Province, is now is in charge of a network of English teachers in Vietnam. And Miss Hương, are you there? Could you share something about the sharing of the knowledge from this webinar to your colleagues? Please turn on your camera. Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm very lucky, and I'm very happy to have a chance to take part in this amazing webinar series. Right, you know, I have attended many webinar series and related to digital technique, digital tool. For example, Nearpod, tech, because I'm a little bit nervous because it's really right. I haven't prepared anything for my speech, so I feel a little bit nervous. So when I have a chance to do research on using some digital tool, digital platforms or tool, for example, Nearpod. What else? Flipgrid and many others too. And in many international conferences, I have shared with my college all over Vietnam, all over my province, even all over the world, to know how to take advantage of the benefit of using this tool to make students involved, engaged in the lesson. And we know how to motivate them in our online or offline, even offline lessons. I think they are amazing, right? So, and you know, in the next VTSO International Conference, I have a chance to share some tools, for example, Flipgrid, to have students how to improve their speaking skill, especially during COVID-19 pandemic. They haven't got any chance. They didn't have any chance to improve their speaking skill. So this tool works so well. So I can help them to improve their speaking skill, and other platform for other skill. I think webinar series of yours are amazing to help us to update, to motivate, to know how to motivate students during our teaching, right? Our teaching, our lessons, our designing amazing lessons. Right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hương, for your sharing. I asked this question because, like Christina just shared a Text for Teach platform again. Your account, your account is not for use forever because this will be closed in some months. So I suggest that if you are interested in any resources that Christina shared with you on the Text for Teach platform, you can download or share with your colleagues, or just give for your for your as a teaching materials in the future. I encourage all of you to do so. Because maybe 2 or 3 months after the webinar series, maybe your account is not valid anymore. We still have one more webinar on August the 31st, and will be about assessment. And on that day, we will invite the director of SEAMEO RETRAC and representative from RELO or U.S. Consulate General in Ho Chi Minh City to attend the closing ceremony. So maybe on that day, the time for the webinar will be a little bit shorter, leaving about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for the closing ceremony. And I hope that all of you will join that event. So that I'm sorry, the webinar number 6. To show our enthusiasm and commitment to the representative from RELO and RETRAC management. Thank you very much. And it's time now. It's time to say goodbye. Thank you very much for joining, and goodbye, everyone. Have a good day. Christina from Florida. Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.